Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
We've talked quite a bit about civil asset forfeiture on this channel, and I pointed out quite often that most people think it's wrong, yet the government still does it, and they get away with it because the courts say, well, this is legal. The good news is that there are some judges out there who apparently don't think it's such a great idea, and there are some attorneys now who are doing some creative things to try to attack civil asset forfeiture. And several people sent me a story from Reason.com who's doing great work on this, about a guy whose money was stolen by the DEA, and he got it back plus extra because they did a creative thing here. So after the DEA stole $70,000 from a filmmaker, he got his money back plus a $15,000 settlement on top of his money. And so there are some different aspects to this case and how they handled it. But this is brilliant, it's good news, and it shows that I think the pendulum might be swinging back or the tide might be changing. Jacob Sullum wrote the story for Reason.com. It's quite lengthy, and I'm just going to summarize it for you. But a man whose last name is ATN, he's a filmmaker, and he was traveling with cash, $70,000 of it. Now, he didn't realize that the government could seize his money even if he's doing nothing wrong. And so he learned about civil asset forfeiture the hard way. The rude surprise was the beginning of a sadly familiar story. And the good news is that he found a lawyer who very creatively went after this and he got all his money back. So his attorneys, Jonathan Corbett, filed a federal lawsuit arguing that the DEA had violated his Fourth Amendment rights. But there's a twist, and we'll get to it. So he's 43 years old, independent filmmaker with a studio in Manhattan, frequently carries cash for his projects because it's a common practice in the industry. He's often paying the people who work for him as contractors in cash just because it's easier, and he's often putting together crews at the last minute, that kind of thing. So he went to California to work on two projects, flying from JFK Airport out to California. There's two different projects he's working on. And so he had lined up interviews for these films he's working on, which one of them is a documentary, and he brought along almost $69,000 in cash, mostly in hundreds and fifties, because he wanted to be able to hire crew members, rent equipment, cover other expenses, and do it without having to go through all the paperwork of writing checks and so on. So he knew that he needed to protect the money somehow. So he put it inside an old Xbox that was inside a carry-on bag. And he said, I didn't want anyone to suspect that I had cash on me. I was hiding the money from the usual suspects, so to speak. But of course, the money was snagged by the DEA. Now here's the thing. The DEA didn't discover the money. The TSA did. So when the TSA was searching his stuff, he said, that's money in there. And they said, oh, okay. And it's legal to carry money, so the TSA can't do anything about it. But they called the DEA and said, hey, we've got a guy here just went through our checkpoint carrying $69,000 in cash. You might want to take it. So ATN was detained for about an hour. He missed his flight, and the loss of his money, of course, ended his project. He made the trip anyway in a different flight. He says basically to apologize to everyone and say, this is not going to happen. I'm sorry. I don't have my money anymore. Now, remember the TSA's job is to screen passengers and luggage for safety reasons. ATN should have been free to catch his flight once it was clear there's nothing dangerous about the money he was carrying. But TSA officers have a history of collaborating with the DEA, and we've mentioned that before. Quite often it's a TSA that sees the money. See it. They see it with their eyeballs. The TSA views the money, and they call the DEA and say, hey, this guy's got money on him. So they, of course, are searching for cash because if they find it, they get to keep it. So it turns out that the guy from the DEA said to ATN, you know what this looks like, right? And I was like, no, I don't know what it looks like. And he never actually said you're a drug dealer, but the implication was clear. So he did not believe the man's explanation that I'm an independent filmmaker and I carry cash to make films, and the DEA took his money. Now, ATN's worked in the film industry for about 20 years. He showed the TSA his website, gave the agent the phone numbers of people he's going to work with who could vouch for him, and said basically all these different reasons why my money is innocent. And DEA didn't care. DEA just said, here's a receipt for your money. We're taking it. So before the encounter at JFK, he said, I was never in trouble in any sort of way. Here I am being compliant. I'm trusting the person with the badge. It was traumatic. After the shock wore off, he tried finding attorneys. The first few he talked to were criminal defense attorneys who said, hey, we don't handle that kind of stuff. He was kind of scared. And an accountant friend introduced ATN to an attorney named Corbett, who is a Hollywood attorney who calls himself a professional troublemaker. Corbett specializes in civil rights cases and has repeatedly challenged TSA screening practices. And this is the different aspect to this case. A lot of the people we talk about civil asset forfeiture have their money taken by the side of the road by a police officer. But here, the DEA was not there. They only came there because the TSA called them. And that's the angle that this guy used. So the first step in trying to recover the money was to file a petition for remission or mitigation with the DEA. That's the same agency, of course, that took the money. So you file a request with them, can we have our money back? So Corbett's attitude was not that of a supplicant. He was basically saying, you've taken my client's money unlawfully. Corbett's negotiations with the DEA and the U.S. Department of Justice dragged on for months by phone and by email. At one point in time, they offered to let him keep some of the money if they let the government keep the rest. And they were negotiating what that split would be. And Corbett stuck to his guns and goes, no, we want it all back. This isn't a negotiation, okay? You stole the money, we want the money back. So the government proposed in an email to Corbett that the government would return 90% of the money if the claimant, that's the man whose money was stolen, will consent to the forfeiture of 10%. So just give us 10%. But the problem, of course, is he would have to renounce any legal claims in connection with the events involving the seizure of the cash. Corbett said, no, we want it all back. What part of that don't you understand? So his position was that ATN should not have to give up any of his money because there's no basis for the seizure. So the Justice Department kept digging in their heels, but they also started poking around in ATN's bank records in an attempt to build a better case. So they were trying to find some money. They were trying to find some reasons to justify keeping the money. He said, I was shocked that they could look into my bank account. As a U.S. citizen, I thought that was private, but obviously I was wrong. They can willy-nilly take a look and see whatever they want to see. The Justice Department at one point even threatened to go after him for structuring, saying that they saw unusual deposits and withdrawals from his account. But Corbett, the attorney, says, no, my client was not involved in any form of structuring, and that's nonsense. So that allegation seemed like an effort by the government to increase its leverage in negotiations. ATN says they were trying to use that as a threat. They wanted to negotiate a partial return of my money. Otherwise, they said they'd pursue criminal charges. Despite the pressure, ATN turned down the offer from the government of 90% of his money. And the good news here is that the attorney is bringing the offers to the client, saying, look, they've offered you this, they've offered you this, they've offered you this. And apparently the attorney is saying, they've offered you this, but I think we can do better. However, the choice is up to you. And that's how it should be. So it was quite a while, and this is not a small amount of money to my client, Corbett says. It was his business, his livelihood. Taking someone $70,000 for 8 months is something that's going to have a negative effect. This guy had to go without his money for 8 months. He was illegally stopped and searched. He had to pay attorney fees to get his money back. So ATN says the financial stress caused by the seizure forced him to pass up film projects he could have worked on. He said, that's a chunk of change I missed very much, screwed up a lot of things. There were a lot of projects that I couldn't really say yes to because I could not afford the cost of flights, because flights are often involved in this. So Corbett thought ATN deserved compensation for his trouble and his legal expenses, as well as all his money back. So last February, seeing that the negotiations were going nowhere, he filed a lawsuit in federal court. And here is the different thing that he did than what I've heard most other attorneys doing here. He sued the U.S. government under the Federal Tort Claims Act, and he sued the officer who took his money, and he sued the TSA. The TSA is at the center of this, and most people go, hey, the DEA took my money. I should go after them. Well, did the TSA call them in? What were they doing that for? So those claims relied on Bivens' famous case, 1971 Supreme Court, that allows lawsuits against federal officials accused of violating people's constitutional rights. According to ATN's complaint, the TSA officer violated the Fourth Amendment by detaining him and continuing to search his property after it was clear it could not possibly constitute a threat to aviation security, because that is the TSA's one and only job. I mean, I know they think their job is to harass you and make you take off your belt for giggles, but their actual job is security. It's safety. And once they've determined that you are not a threat to aviation security, they should give you back your belt and let you go, okay? At that point, the complaint said the screener's aim was determining whether the cash might be of interest to DEA. So the TSA agent, although not explicitly on the payroll of the DEA, appears to be working for the DEA for some weird reason. The lawsuit argued that the agent from the DEA likewise violated the Fourth Amendment by detaining ATN without reasonable suspicion or probable cause, and then by seizing the money. But notice that part of the complaint is not just about the money. It's about the fact that they held this guy and questioned him about money, and they had no reason to do that. So they seized the money without probable cause to believe that it was related to criminality in any way. Now, this did go to a first hearing before U.S. District Judge Frederick Block, Corbett says. The government argued that the agent from the DEA should receive qualified immunity, which, of course, we talked about before. They were going to try and argue that the large amount of money combined with the concealment was enough for an arguable probable cause, Corbett says. I've never seen a case where a large amount of money concealed has been held to be probable cause. I don't think it would be. I think it's ridiculous. And the judge appeared to agree. According to Corbett, Block made it clear that he did not like the government's position at all and basically told the government that they probably want to settle. And that's always nice when a judge sees a case early on and sees it for what it is and goes, you know something? He looks at both parties like that, especially the wearing glasses, and goes, you might want to settle, and points at somebody who's in trouble. Now, they don't have to settle. It's the government. They've got unlimited resources to battle the filmmaker with $70,000. But the judge says, you might want to settle. So they went to a mediation, and at the mediation, the government agreed to pay ATN back his $70,000 and an additional $15,000. And at that point in time, he had $13,000 in attorney fees and court costs. So a lot of people have pointed out, and they say, Steve, when someone gets their money back and they have an attorney there, well, they got to pay the attorney, and if they lose a third of it to the attorney, they still lost. Well, this guy had $13,000 in attorney fees and costs. He was awarded $15,000 on top of the full return of his money. So his attorney got paid, he got all his money back and a couple bucks extra, but he still shouldn't have gone through this. And here's the thing. This is a great case. This is a great result. It still shouldn't have happened. But when you see a great case like this might be, a start of something good. So ATN says now, I'm not going to travel with that much cash anymore. Says he decided to publicize his case to raise awareness of civil forfeiture. And he hopes that as more and more people hear about this, there might be a change in policy and practices. ATN learned that other people had been victimized in strikingly similar ways, and he talks about these other cases that we've talked about here. So the real difference here is the man was going through the airport, stopped by TSA, who said, you've got cash on you. And the TSA's job is the safety and security of what's going on to planes. Cash is not unsafe on board a plane. So when the TSA detained him and tipped off the DEA, then the DEA detained him and took his money. His attorney went to federal court and said the two detentions were illegal, plus the seizure of the money was illegal, and all of this stuff is wrapped up together. And so this probably won't help the average person who's driving down the road and a police officer pulls them over and has, let's assume for a moment, a valid reason to pull them over, okay? And during the stop, they discover the cash, they take the cash. Well, you're not going to make the argument about the detention, and you're not going to be able to make the argument about the officer who's got one job calling in the officer who's got the other job. But here you have it where one agency, the TSA, has no business doing this, but they did it anyway. And so the lawsuit was against the two agents as well as the entities that took the money, which would be the DEA. So it's a great result. And again, as more and more people hear about this, I think more and more we're going to hear about judges who say, that's not quite right. And unfortunately, everyone knows, this is the emperor's clothes, right? Everyone knows that what they do is wrong. To take the money from somebody is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. Unlawful search and seizure, unlawful seizure. So they take the money and then they keep it without due process, violation of the Fifth Amendment. Everyone knows this. Everyone knows this. But they created this weird fiction a long time ago. It says, well, no, we're not accusing you of wrongdoing. We're accusing the money of wrongdoing. And the money's got to, in essence, defend itself. Who will speak for the money? Oh, you will? Okay, then prove the money's innocent. And because the money's not a person, the same standards don't apply. If they accused you of a crime, they got to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. They accuse your money of a crime, you've got to prove it in a preponderance that your money's innocent. Everyone knows that's wrong. Everyone knows it's a weird judicial fiction that was invented by courts a long time ago. It's outdated. It's wrong. And so what's I'm hoping going to happen here is that attorneys are going to find ways like this to go around and say, something, we're not even necessarily talking just about the seizure and the forfeiture. Let's talk about the detention that led to the forfeiture. And when you get it all wrapped up like that, and you get it in front of a judge who looks at it and goes, I think this is wrong, you're going to get a good result. So this is a very good result. But Jonathan Corbett's the attorney who handled this case, based in California, but the lawsuit was filed in New York because that's where the flight originated and where the money was seized, I'm assuming. So it's a great story from Reason.com. Jacob Sullum wrote it. It was sent to me by Jason, Neil, Mike, and Brad. Thank you very much, guys, from Reason.com. After the DEA stole $70,000 from his filmmaker, he got his money back, plus a $15,000 settlement. A very good result. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. It is not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves.